False kings. Where do we draw the line? The marshes of Bragisland are quiet. Perhaps too quiet. There is no clash of metal on metal to disturb the waterfowl and the frogs. No iron feet splashing in the dank ponds. No blood spilled for the hungry flies. Yet the silence is still disquieted, with whispered ripples spreading across the still surface of the western marches. People are talking, and while their voices are quiet now, there is a real risk they may become louder and louder in the months to come. The Jotun armies have hunkered down in North Fens and the Grey Fens, laying down palisades wherever they can find solid ground and watching their own borders for signs of an imperial assault that never comes. Only the Yagara of Matilda Fisher are especially active, with messengers under flags of truce spreading across the marshes and speaking to the Bregas about the evils of the Empire and the ambitious future where Bragisland is independent of Orc or Imperial. The only Imperial army in Bragisland this season is the Strong Reeds. Many of these soldiers are good Bregas folk, and this season sees them putting their knowledge of the deep marshes and the hearts of the people who live here to the test. Not for the Strong Reeds, the relative comfort of dry beds and warm food enjoyed by the Tusks, currently billeted in neighbouring Upwold. Rather, they make do with bivouacs, concealed tents, out-of-the-way camps, and the all-freezing mud and hungry bugs they can tolerate. The army has been ordered to lie low, to resist the Jotun where they can, but to prioritise stealth over combat. If the Jotun armies in Bragisland had gone on the offensive, the Strong Reeds would have slowed their advance without risking direct confrontation. But the Orcs and their human pawns do not attack. Instead, they are regrouping, focusing their attention on protecting the land they have taken, seemingly convinced that the Empire would continue their attempt to liberate the territory that they began in the wake of the autumn equinox last year. During the winter solstice, Imperial heroes brought a large number of Jotun Orcs and their Yagara to battle at Mire's End. Their raid recovered a portion of the equipment intended to arm rebels in Bragisland. That cash is put to good use, replacing and repairing weapons and armours for the Strong Reeds. Not all of these weapons and armour were recovered, however. The remainder is used to arm misguided Bregas who listen to the propaganda of Matilda Fisher and take up the Jotun-backed cause as their own. Yet, the decisive actions of Imperial heroes have dampened the impact of Matilda's words. There are only a comparatively small number of Bregas, primarily in the Western Fens, who are listening, and have become enthralled by her plan for an independent state between the Jotun nation and the Empire. Those who are prepared to fight are being armed and openly supporting the invaders. They do so for any number of reasons. Some are tired of being Imperial citizens. Some are sick of the ribbing they receive from their neighbours in Mitwold and Upwold about how strange they are. Some have a strong family tradition of bloody-mindedness and never wanted to be part of the Empire in the first place. Others are simply ambitious. They see a way that they can turn the current confusion to their advantage, perhaps intending to play both sides against the middle. There's no doubt that given enough time, however, this persuasive speaker could win more and more people to her cause. Scouts, clever Bregas beaters in service to the Strong Reeds, report that there's no sign of Stephen of Sarcum in Bragisland. He and his Mormord exiles seem to have quit the territory in the week following the winter solstice. They also report that Matilda Fisher has brought in more of her own people, perhaps to replace the Mormord bill block. They can't be precise, but they do agree that several hundred more human folk, whose attire suggests both the practical stolidity of the Bregas and the leather and fur of the Jotun, have crossed the border out of Hordaland. They arrive in the first month after the solstice, and there's a very guarded estimate that they have swollen Matilda's warband to half again its former size. Illusion and dream. It's not just Jotun and Yagara in Bragisland this season. The barbarian armies are supported by warbands of laughing golden-haired knights of Elfin Mien, conjured from the fields of glory to fight alongside the orcs. It seems likely that the Jotun had planned to continue expanding their control of the territory, but only if they were assured of support from the local populace. Denied that certainty by the raid through the Sentinel Gate, they've instead fallen back to the defensive positions to see how the situation develops. Rather than chafe at the lack of combat, the Fey warriors amuse themselves by hosting tourneys and banquets among the reeds and meres of the northern marshes. The Empire has its own supernatural supporters. Ottermire and the Rushes are woven with strands of night magic that make the marshes themselves resist the Jotun and the Yagara. This season sees multiple credible reports of weird little creatures abroad in the fens. Round-headed, round-eyed, lanky figures with glowing lanterns that cluster around the Jotun camps at night, seeking to lure them into the bottomless lakes and sucking quagmires of Bragisland. When they encounter marchers, they doff little brown and green caps of woven rushes, offering in piping voices to lead them to safety. For all their friendly words, few Bragis take them up on their kind offers. All in all, the season is quiet. There's a few minor altercations when Jotun patrols encounter strong reeds camped in the fens, or when the latter see an opportunity to harry the former into the fens and the quagmires. Yet, all is clearly not well in Bragisland. There is a sense of foreboding, especially between the households of the south and east, some of whom are at great pains to remind everyone how loyal to the marchers they are, and those of the north and the west, who are at best quietly contemplative, giving careful consideration to the shape of the future. Game information. With no fighting on either side, the situation in Bragisland hasn't changed. The Jotun still control the North Fens and Grey Fens, although their hold on the latter is somewhat shaky, thanks to the Imperial assault after the autumn equinox. The Strong Reeds have been making use of their special lay low order and have received emergency resupply. They weren't able to benefit from natural resupply due to the presence of enemy armies in the territory. Unfortunately, this means that the enchantment that had been placed on them, Brotherhood of Tian, which is contingent on natural resupply, had no effect. The human Yagara that fight under the banner of Matilda Fisher are being bolstered by dissatisfied Bragis. It's estimated that perhaps 250 or so former Marcher citizens have openly embraced the cause of independence for Bragisland. This number would have been easily doubled if the proposed meeting and mithril dissemination had taken place after the winter solstice. If nothing changes, then each season that Matilda, and potentially Stephen of Sarkham as well, are openly recruiting in Bragisland will see more people drawn to the banner of the independent Bragisland. If sufficient force is gathered to see human forces reach an accumulated total of 5,000 strength, then with Jotun assistance, they will transition from groups of champions into a full-blown campaign army. Fisher's voice. Last season, as the Jotun and the Empire clashed in Bragisland, the human champion Matilda Fisher sent messengers to every village, market town and steward across the territory. Approaching under a flag of truce, they brought word from Matilda and urged all Bragis to quit the Empire. This season, those messengers have been active again, and the content of their messages has spread beyond the borders of Bragisland. Matilda Fisher. Matilda Fisher is the champion of a large contingent of human warriors who fight alongside the Jotun. These human warriors are called Yagara by the Jotun. Matilda claims to be a descendant of the Fishers of Greywater, a marcher household who once laid claim to much of western Bragisland back before the Cousins' War. She says she has returned to liberate Bragisland from the imperial occupation and claim it as its steward. She claims that the orcs of Narkist are here fighting to support her claim, rather than seeking to press their own. There is no doubt that the Fishers were once a powerful household who opposed Marcher involvement in the Empire. They fought against Tom Drake and the pro-imperial houses during the Cousins' War, and whilst they were defeated, they never surrendered. Old Bragis histories say that they retreated west into the marshes of Hordaland. Matilda claims that her household has dwelled there for the last 400 years or so. Now they're back to reclaim from the Empire the land that was once theirs. The Empire is bad. Matilda's household have fought alongside the warriors of Stephen of Sarcum, although there's no sign of him or his Yagara in Bragisland this season. A deadly master of partisan and pike, he and his supporters were born or grew up during the Jotun occupation of the Mournwold. They've spoken passionately about the horrors visited on the people of the Mourn by the people who allegedly were there to protect them. Not one person fighting under Stephen's banner came out of the calamitous curses that struck the Mourn with all of their family. This, more than anything else, is what drove them to follow the Jotun when they retreated from the Mournwold. They claim that the callous actions of the Empire prove that it doesn't actually care about any of the individual nations that compose it. Worse, they don't care about the land, prepared to poison it with spring and winter ritual magic if it suits the generals of the military council or the sorcerers of the imperial conclave. Matilda echoes and amplifies these claims, warning that it's only a matter of time before the Empire does something similar again, perhaps even in Bragisland. The Jotun would never curse their own people. Far from it. Protecting those who work the land is the highest calling of the Western Orcs, the epitome of their honour, and likewise the calling of the Fishers and the Mournwold exiles. Free Bragisland. Matilda Fisher is here to reclaim her ancestral land, the land she says belongs to her household. She counts North Fens, Grey Fens and Ottermire as Fisher land, or land that belonged to the smaller households that fought under the banner of her ancestors. Yet there's more to her strategy than just claiming the Western Marshes. She intends to free the whole of Bragisland from the Empire. The Jotun have agreed a treaty with Matilda and her household. They will recognise Bragisland as an independent nation allied with the Jotun. They have little interest in marshes and swamps, after all. There is no reason the Empire could not do the same. Those Bragas who wanted to do so would still be able to visit Anvil and trade there. Unlike the hated Tom Drake, conniving Henry of Mead and the cursed Bridget Durfan, Matilda has no interest in forcing hegemony on the people of Bragas. She claims it was the Empire's drive to dominate the Marches and force them to combine under a single flag that prompted the Cousins' War. Her messengers seem to firmly believe that the first Empress intentionally engineered a civil war in the Marches. The reasons they give sound like wild conspiracies, but revolve around the idea of weakening the Marches so that they would have no choice but to submit to rulership of the Empire, led, of course, by its Dornish queen. Rebellion and secession. Matilda is preaching rebellion and secession. Leave the Empire to the squabbling families of Upwold and Mitwold, the same households who tore the Marches apart in the Cousins' War. Take up arms and fight alongside the Yagara, and once Bragisland has been liberated, the Jotun will help to keep it free of Imperial occupation. Any Bragas who wishes to do so will be welcome to come fight alongside the Jotun armies in the coming season. If the Empire, or even just the Marches, recognises the independence of Bragisland and withdraws their troops, then the Jotun will agree not to pursue their claim to the lands of their ancestors currently occupied by the Marches, which is Mourn, Mitwold and Upwold, for the next 5 years, or until the Empire moves against Bragisland. It won't be a peace treaty, as such, but a commitment by the Jotun to leave the Marches to their own devices for a while. Don't take the battlefield. To those still listening to her messengers, Matilda has one last message. She knows about the Sentinel Gate and how it allows Imperials from Anvil to reach different parts of their empire. She urges anyone with influence at Anvil to discourage the military council from using it to interfere in Bragisland. Go elsewhere. Deal with other threats. Matilda likewise has one last thing to say. She doesn't particularly enjoy fighting Marches, and neither does Stephen, but she will if she has to. She sends thanks to those who were able to convince the military council to pull their forces back out of Bragisland, minimising the amount of Marcher blood spilled. She calls on them to do so again, to keep Imperial armies out of Marcher business and let Bragisland go its own way. The Bragas Rebellion in play. During the coming season, any military unit owned by a Bragisland character will be free to fight alongside the Jotun. You can find the option to support Bragisland Rebellion in the paid work drop-down, although it provides no production. Taking this option will involve fighting against Imperial forces if there's a battle in Bragisland, and will constitute treason. There is no easy way, however, for the Empire to recognise Bragisland military units fighting with Matilda Fisher. Further reading. You might be interested in the Further Winds of War for Spring 384YE, and you might also be interested in Homeward Bounders, which is a Winter 383YE Wind of War that introduced Matilda Fisher.